Thank you, Sabine. Yeah, we're going to discuss resource utilisation and space law. And it's a pleasure and honour to have Étienne Schneider here, who's Deputy Prime Minister of Luxembourg and the Minister of the Economy in Luxembourg. Regulating space must be the ultimate challenge for a diplomat or a country. You're not only dealing with private companies up there, who owns the resources, but I suppose we need global agreements, because which country should have jurisdiction over space? So how do you approach these problems?
Actually, you know, I used to be together with Switzerland. I was the political chairman of ESA, the European Space Agency, for 2 years. And during that time, I was talking to my fellow colleagues about using space on a commercial base. And I told them that we would really need a legal framework in order to do so, meaning that we should try to change the United Nations Space Act of the year 1967, because in that Space Act, the question of the commercial use of space is not addressed, because at that time it was complete science fiction. So the only thing the Space Act says is that everything which is in space belongs to humankind. So, you know, being a Minister of the Economy, I know that if you bring stuff down from space and you want to commercialize it, but it belongs to humankind, to everybody, you know, that's not a good business model. So, so we decided to create our own framework, because at that time ESA was not that much interested in doing so, and so we said, okay, maybe some countries should take the lead and just, you know, try already to figure out how such a legal framework could look like, and that's exactly what we did. And now, in 2 weeks' time, the Luxembourg Parliament will vote that bill, and Luxembourg will be the first European country having a legal framework for space resources, actually, and the second in the world after the United States. So what we did in the meantime is triggering a discussion on the United Nations level in order to get an international legal framework in order to make this happen.
So, Frans, you're a professor of space law. So, at the moment, we have 2 jurisdictions, is that right? The United States will have a framework, and Luxembourg will have a framework. So, how do you manage that, those competing jurisdictions at the moment?
That's a great question. Luckily, the Outer Space Treaty did allow some wiggle room in terms of what it actually said, which is where the United States jumped in, but with the specific limitation, and that goes to your question of, we apply American jurisdiction, American legal power only to US entrepreneurs. So what the US Act basically says, that if in the US there's a legal dispute over who owns the resources, a US court will recognize the one who first got to the asteroid in a fair and legal manner. Which means that if you're outside of the US, you don't know yet what your legal rights are. And that's where Luxembourg comes in to give a second example, following basically the same approach. And if at the end of the day, we will have all countries applying a similar regime, then we can speak of a truly legal regime applicable across the world.
So, Jean-Louis, what happens if then, so a US company goes to an asteroid, and then a European company arrives at the asteroid, and maybe a Chinese company arrives at the asteroid. Do we have any framework to manage that at the moment?
Well, first of all, I think that, as Étienne and Frans already discussed, there's the international level and there's the national level. It is, first of all, essential that you do have a framework in the country where you're coming from, basically. That is the case now for the US, that is the case for Luxembourg, will be the case in my eyes pretty soon for others. And then you have the international level, which is basically the Outer Space Treaty, which is a treaty which goes back to the Cold War. So no one was actually envisaging at the time that you would utilize and explore space resources in a commercial manner that allows the various countries to put up their national legislations, but at the same time, I think it is important that the Outer Space Treaty does not necessarily need to be amended, but perhaps clarified or through some sort of additional mechanism bring the various regimes together. But to the extent that all the regimes that are being put in place pointing to the same direction, namely that these resources are capable of being appropriated, which is what the US Act says, which is what the Luxembourg law will say. If we have a second and a third and a fourth law, you can be pretty sure that they will say the same thing. So that is how you develop the international framework then that you need to decide who actually is entitled to what. You know, when it comes to spectrum, we have the ITU, where the countries discuss about spectrum, and that is also something which is up there. I'm not drawing a total analogy, but there's some similarities nevertheless.
Yeah. Kyle, I'm interested as someone who works in business. It seems to me that business is in some ways ahead of the legislation in this respect. It doesn't seem too long before companies are going to be out there, at least prospecting for resources, if not mining them. So how do you function in that environment? Do you just plough on and think that the legislators are going to catch up at some point?
Absolutely. Generally, we think that technology comes first and law comes second. And a lot of the work that we do is helping the legislators to understand exactly what needs to be regulated and what doesn't need to be regulated, because that's another really important point. So as we form our business plans, as we produce our business models, we're in constant communication with lawyers, with government, with academia, to better understand how the legal framework could be produced that's beneficial not only for the companies, but for everybody.
It's interesting to think about the future, isn't it, in terms of nation states managing space. Is that going to be the way that it evolves, or is it, as you said, that the nation state can only hope to manage the entrepreneurs from that state?
Let's put it that way. What we are trying to do, we wanted to be one of the first movers, because we want things to happen. So we decided to get our law, as the United States did. What we are now doing is talking to many different other governments which are like-minded, in order to get them on our boat, in order to trigger together this discussion, which, by the way, started at the UN level. So what we're doing is really, Luxembourg is really open in, for collaboration with other countries. That's exactly what we're doing right now. We signed already MOUs with other countries, which are also, which are supporting this idea in doing business in space in the future. So, we try step by step to get all the like-minded countries together, and then have more power on the United Nations level in order to make things change, and in order to get a legal framework which will be applicable to all countries on Earth.
Might be an unfair question, but it occurs to me, since you're the Minister for the Economy, how do you tax the exploitation of resources in space? Does anybody think about that? I mean, are they free?
Luxembourg is not known for taxes, so no. I guess there will be a revenue for the company which is incorporated in the country, and that revenue will be taxed as any other revenue is taxed in the country as well. So I don't think that that's the major problem for the moment. No. Because of course, I think that if you're talking about space mining, that's something which will happen, at the long term. There are, of course, revenues which are occurring already today. Think about SES, which is also space resource business, satellites and other businesses which are going to be developed right now. But then the mining is really a long-term vision. And but coming back to your question, I think that's not a problem.
I asked the question, I know you smiled there, but I suppose the interesting thing for me, and perhaps many people listening, is that we're talking about a new economy in a new place. It's almost like finding it's like going to America and building a new country,
Absolutely.
Isn't it? So in that sense, these questions are, we're starting again, or are we? Or are we transplanting?
In a sense, and I mean, to start off, if governments really look for an argument to tax, they will be able to find an argument, and they can frame that in a legal context. For example, as Étienne pointed out, by taxing the revenues, regardless of where the actual activity earning those revenues takes place. But there's been a case in California a number of years ago where the California authorities tried to tax a satellite operation on the basis that the satellite was manufactured in California by Hughes, and they considered that enough of a legal link. It was thrown out of court, but I mean, just it tells you that in this new venture, and that also goes to what you're saying, governments in legislating trying to catch up and see which things work and which things don't work. And obviously everybody has their own ideas on what taxation is appropriate.
There have been these. The only case I can think of, you'll perhaps think of more, but was the reading of Genesis on Apollo 8. That was a famous case, wasn't it? They went to the Supreme Court, didn't it, in the US, and they said they didn't have jurisdiction in
which was
lunar orbit.
actually bailing out of the question, because it is true that the United States does not have territorial jurisdiction in outer space, like any other country. The fact that Rusty's colleagues planted the US flag on the moon back in the 1969-70s didn't mean that the moon was US territory. It just meant that the US taxpayer had paid for the trip. And this also applies to this idea. I mean, again, you can find any way to tax it if you're really looking for it.
Kyle, I suppose the question would be, when does this become critical for industry? When do you need a framework in place? Or is it, as you said earlier, that you'll just carry on anyway and people will sort it out when they have to?
I think that a lot of companies find that they want to raise money, and what venture capitalists will say is that they want some legal certainty, that what we say we're going to do is actually going to be possible. Of course, we would ask Étienne and others in governments to keep taxes low at the beginning, so that we can earn more.
I don't want everyone to focus on tax.
No, of course, so please. But in the end, we want to be sure that there is a legal framework that will allow the activities that we want to do. So we think that these discussions are happening now because they take some time. These things are not done overnight. And so it's important that we, as you mentioned, start these discussions early so that something is there when we're ready.
Is this, in your experience, going to be more difficult than building international treaties between countries, or less difficult because it's a new arena?
Well, I think that looking at it from a national framework, we obviously have a number of examples on which we can draw. Although we're working in a different area, we're working in an area where no country has jurisdiction per se. We nevertheless can draw on the experience we have in the satellite world, we have in the telecommunication world, we have in the banking world. All those are regulated businesses. So when it comes to the point, how do I regulate this business, which are the provisions I need to put into the law, I think we basically know how to do that. So that's not terribly difficult. By the way, the Luxembourgish law has 18 articles, which is a normal size, I would say, for initial regulation. So that's the rules that will apply. And obviously, to the extent that, for example, the Luxembourgish rules, like probably all the other rules, will require the companies to come up with risk assessment. That means that there will be an interaction with the government and the companies to define what is exactly needed to get an authorization, because it's an authorization regime and the government will supervise. That's one part of the law. And the other part of the law is the Article 1, which says that the resources are capable of being appropriate. So the crafting the national legal framework, I don't think is something which is overly complicated, and to the extent we see all the other countries going into the same direction, I think that from a legal and a regulatory perspective, it would not be difficult either to set up additional international rules. Probably France and I would be capable of doing it, but then you have the political discussion behind, and that's for it, yeah.
So you said, in legal terminology, resources are capable of being appropriated. Does that mean, essentially, if you go and stick your flag on an asteroid, it's yours? Or does it mean something else?
Well,
what does it mean?
It means that to some people, and that's a little bit the political discussion that is taking place right now. But you have to separate between putting your flag somewhere as a country and saying, this is my territory, and owning some resource in the territory. And the best comparison that I always make is with the law of the seas, the high seas. The high seas don't belong to any one country, but as long as you go there in conformity with international law and you fish, the fish in the net is yours. You can appropriate that fish and make money with it. And that's the closest comparison that we have, and that's the most appropriate one I think we can apply to outer space.
I see. So the territory itself is not.
You can't, as the United States, say, this area is mine, everybody stay out, and maybe 100 years from now we will allow someone to go there, everybody else stays out. No, that is something which you cannot do.
There's another analogy with, which I would draw with the civil code. The civil code, except for real estate, but that's a different part. In civil code countries, the law doesn't either tell you how do I appropriate, for example, this table. Am I the owner of this table now because I'm touching it, you know? That is, there's no legal provision which says how that takes place. There are basic principles which apply, and these principles will also apply here.
Étienne, I'm interested in just politically, because I suppose a lot of people out there in countries think that this is so far in the future that it's not an immediate concern. So they would perhaps say, well, Parliament should be discussing things close to home. So what is it about Luxembourg? Because I know that you've taken the lead in this. What is it that allows you, I suppose, to get the parliamentary time to take a lead in this?
You know, the fact is that when I started, or when we launched this initiative, spaceresources.lu, in February last year, many people were laughing about that. Or the leader of the opposition, he said that he would offer me a one-way ticket to Mars. But I think now, a little bit more than a year later, they don't laugh anymore because they see that there's real economic activity behind. And what we are aiming to is to gather all these companies and the know-how, the research and development. That's what we want to attract to Luxembourg, and that's why we put in place this legal framework. That's why we have these infrastructures. That's why we are going to have a space agency now. That's why we are planning to have a venture capital fund in order to attract all these companies. I'm coming back from a trip. By the way, I'm just back from San Francisco, where I met a lot of people, startups in this business. Everybody is really interested in settling down in Luxembourg, bringing their European headquarters to Luxembourg. I met guys from venture capital funds. One is willing to bring 1 billion euros to Luxembourg, dedicated to space resource initiatives. So to startups like iSpace, which are really going into that business. I met a lady at the Bourget in France, which wants to bring 350 million euros as a dedicated venture capital fund for space resource initiatives. So, all this is getting real. And that's the point, Luxembourg has always known how to take advantage of being the first mover. So, when the steel industry had its decline in the 1970s, we decided that we need something else in order to make our economy work, and we decided to become a financial center. At that time, we didn't have anything. We had maybe 3 banks over here in Luxembourg. And at that time, also, people were laughing about it. But now it's one of the biggest, most important financial centers in the world. We did the same with SES. At the time when we launched SES, together with private investors. There was no insurance company which wanted to give an insurance on the first launch of a satellite. So it was the government who gave this insurance. And this insurance was more or less the value of 5% of our total annual budget. And we took that risk as a government. We had, I was reading the discussions we had in Parliament at that time. And there were, members of Parliament who said, but nobody needs satellites for TV. We have our 3 or 4 TV channels. They start at 5 p.m., stop at 10 p.m. in the evening, and everybody's fine with it. So why do we need more TV channels? And by the way, we have got our antennas on the roof, so there's no need for satellites. Others said that satellites is a danger for humankind because they could fall down to Earth and make huge damage, so the Luxembourg government would be in charge. So, all these kind of discussions. And that was in 1985. That was not in 1900. And if you see the evolution of all these technologies and the evolution of business in space in this 30 years, that's just amazing. And that's exactly what we're saying for this initiative. Even though many of these initiatives may sound a little bit science fiction for the moment, but you know, in 10 years from now, 15, 20 years from now, that will be the big business. And Luxembourg is, you know, one of the leaders, or will be one of the leaders in this business. And that's the aim of doing so. And then maybe one last word. If I'm not trying to do something to develop my country as a politician, if I don't have a vision, you know, you don't, or my country doesn't need me as a minister. Then they need just a manager to manage the ministry. But, you know, politician needs to have some visions for the future of its country. Maybe that will cost my political head one day. But at the end, you need to see what will be the long-term outcome of all this.
The idea that having vision may have political consequences is a shocking way to end this discussion. But there we are. I just over out of time. Thank you very much, and over to Sabinia.
Thank you very much, Brian, and thank you also the panel for that interesting discussion about Luxembourg becoming the hub for space resource initiatives. It's now time for an additional Skype call, and this time we're heading over to Poland, and hopefully we have Thomas Kluwak with us. Thomas, are you there? And you're there with a lot of children. Hi, kids. Happy Asteroid Day.
Yes, hello world. Here build an open observatory in Poznań. Poznań love asteroids, Poznań love observation, love astronomy. Here we have a great event organized by University Association of Amateur Astronomers. Weather could be good. However, we have very interesting workshops and very interesting lectures given by our astronomers. Poznań is the city asteroid friendly. We have impact craters here. We have an asteroid called Poznania, which is quite safe, by the way, so don't worry. And we wish you a great asteroid day today and every day during the next year until the next asteroid day. Hello.
Thomas,
Hello.
Before you disappear, Thomas, can we ask? Yeah, I just want to see, because you have the children there, do we have the next generation of astronomers in there, or astronauts? Can we see waves?
Yeah, wave. We have association of astronomers, and children are welcome, very welcome, and very often goes to our meetings. So you can be sure that we protect our planet together with all the children here.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your contribution and support. That was Asteroid Day Poland. And with that, I hand over to Stuart.
Thank you, Sabinia. And speaking of the next generation of astronomers, Asteroid Day has had a message from a parent whose 8-year-old son is now dedicated to becoming an astronomer because of what he's been watching today. Well, someone who's been putting in many years is with me now, and that's Ian Carnelli from the European Space Agency. Now, you've been working on studies and the designs of missions that will actually try to understand how we deflect any asteroid we see coming towards us.
In the European Space Agencies, we've been working in the concept of deflecting asteroids since many years, and we came out with a concept to demonstrate the kinetic impactor, which is extremely mature in terms of technologies, and that's what we want to demonstrate. So
when you say kinetic impactor, that means you just hit it.
We hit it like, it's very simple. You think about billiard board. You know, you play billiard, you hit the asteroid at 6 kilometers per second, and actually you change the velocity by only 0.5 millimeter per second. But that's enough to nudge it, of course. So the thing is, it works on the computers. We've done plenty of simulations, but we need to know whether it works for real. So that's the purpose of the Asteroid Impact mission. We didn't get all of the funding we wanted, so we're streamlining the mission so that it would cost less and be more efficient. So we're studying now within the European Space Agency a version that could be launched with some commercial satellites to share the ride. And we are also looking now into partnerships with industry. I think the Prime Minister said it well. There's a new generation of industries there that want to do business in space. And so we're trying to find new types of partnerships between the agency and industry so that we can work together on this project.
And in the best possible world, when might we see this launch?
I'm targeting 2023.
Very good. We'll have you back then.
Thank you.
Before then, I'm sure as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Well, before you can hit them, you've actually got to find them. And on that subject, we're going now over to Gianluca for an update.
So thank you, Stuart, again. And now we are going to connect with another very special place when you think about asteroids. We had the pleasure here to welcome Dr. Gareth Williams, Associate Director of the Minor Planet Center, receiving and distributing all the positional data about minor planets, comets, and many other things. So, Gareth, thank you very much for joining us for Asteroid Day Live. Welcome.
Hi, Gianluca. Glad to be here.
It's for me a very nice pleasure, also personal, because after doing for here some astrometry of asteroids, some observations of these very nice objects, it is for me a pleasure to meet who is behind the Minor Planet Center. And I would like to ask you, by the way, Gareth, earlier today we chatted with people working at Catalina Sky Surveys and Pan-STARRS as well, and also other astronomers doing follow-up. And now I would like to kindly ask you to tell us something about the Minor Planet Center modus operandi. How do you handle observation? What is your typical day at the Minor Planet Center? Thank you.
Well, that's a big question. Observations from observers all over the world. And those observers typically separate them between the routine main belt asteroids and the potentially new interesting objects, those that could come close. And for those objects that we can't identify, but that we think are new NEOs, we put them onto a special web page called the NEO confirmation page. And because the observations have uncertainties, when you first discover an asteroid, you don't know how far away it is from us. And so all you have is a direction to an observation. But you don't know how far along that line from the observer to the point on the sky where you're observing the asteroid, the object is. And so you can get a range of orbits, all that fit the available observations, that typically cover 30 to 45 minutes, but you don't know which one is the correct one. So you need more observations. And the NEO confirmation page allows observers to go and get ephemerides, predictions of where the object is going to be or has been, to make follow-up observations, report them to us, we update the NEOCP predictions, and eventually, when we've got enough observations to say with some certainty what type of orbit the object is, we give it a designation, and announce it to the community. And I can show you an example of this if I share my screen with you. Share screen, okay. This is the uncertainty for a newly discovered NEO at the time of discovery. And those green dots are a representation of the 315 orbits that represent the available observations. The uncertainty at the time of the observation is very, very small. It's less than 1 pixel of a typical observer's CCD camera. 6 hours later, the uncertainty has grown to a few pixels because all of these orbits are different, and they're all moving, they're all at different distances from the sun and from the Earth, and they are moving in different directions. And so what starts out as a point, actually it's a long line seen from the end on, smears out into a circular, elliptical, or other weird shape on the sky. After 12 hours, the uncertainty is a few hundred arc seconds, which is about a sixth of the moon diameter. After a day, it becomes several hundred, and so there's this process by...
So sorry, we have a very. I want to thank you for joining us and for sharing with us this part of your work. But I'm sorry, but we are short in time, and I want to thank you for finding the time to join us. So thank you very much for helping us understanding the NEO confirmation page, which is a wonderful resource for all the people doing near-Earth asteroid observations. Thank you very much, Gareth. I wish you a great asteroid day there. Thank you very much. Thank you. And now we are quickly going to UK to find Guy Wells and a few friends there from Northolt Branch Observatory. So I see you there. under in a very nice light. So, good evening, friends.
Hello.
How are you? What are you doing there? Waiting for the night to look for some asteroids, I guess.
Yeah, you can see it's very bright. So.
Yes,
yeah.
I know. This is the bad side of summer for observers. Did you observe some near-Earth asteroids recently? Just to tell us what you did in the past nights? We are very curious.
Well, we have plans for tonight. We have had bad weather for the past few nights, but one of our main targets for tonight is the near-Earth asteroid 2017 MC1. And it's about the size of a football pitch. It will make a close approach later today. 2017 MC1 was discovered at Pan-STARRS on June 20th.
Yes.
And it's a typical example for the large number of objects
That's
that
great.
is discovered every night.
That's great. So we really thank you for sharing with us your experience, and I know you are really doing a big job with the near-Earth objects. So thank you for joining, and wish you a great and clear night with plenty of great observations. Thank you for joining.
Thanks. Happy Asteroid Day, everyone.
So we are back here to the studios, and again, we are with Sabine again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gianluca. And I have the pleasure of having the company of Étienne Schneider, of course, Deputy Prime Minister of Luxembourg and Minister of Economy. It's a great pleasure to have you here, and also to have you here as giving the support that you really do to Asteroid Day. And you were also the panel session prior to this, and it's really interesting to listen to your philosophy and also your determination of really making Luxembourg a hub when it comes to space resources initiatives and also the exploration of space. And bearing in mind that also encapsulates supporting Asteroid Day, what do you hope, what kind of impact do you hope that Asteroid Day will have in the future?
You know, for me, Asteroid Day fits really exactly into our strategy. You know, because you might see an asteroid as a threat, which it is, or which it might be. Think about the dinosaurs who didn't survive due to an impact of an asteroid. But on the other hand, our initiative, the Space Resource Initiative, which I launched a little bit more than a year ago, is you know, the opportunity. We see the opportunity in the asteroids because of the value of the material which you can harvest one day on asteroids. So, you know, on the one side, an asteroid may be a threat, but on the other side, it may also be an opportunity and a huge value for humankind.
And also that Asteroid Day now has its headquarters here in Luxembourg. What do you see sort of going on with the sort of collaboration with Luxembourg and politics and venture capital, and then you have Asteroid Day as a non-profit?
You know, since we launched the initiative of space resources a little bit more than a year ago, there are so many companies, but not only companies, also research institutes, politicians, governments, which are knocking on our door because they want to know what exactly are we doing, and they want to participate in it, and they want to settle down in Luxembourg. So, you know, for me, it's extremely important to have this whole panel of this community in Luxembourg, not only the businessmen, but also the, you know, the research development associations like Asteroid Day. I made an agreement now with the City Institute from California 2 days ago in California in order to have them as a branch in Luxembourg as well, because we think that all this goes together, and we want to create this, you know, huge, interesting community of space cowboys, space guys over here in Luxembourg.
Well, I really applaud that initiative, and I also thank you for your time, Étienne, and thank you for supporting Asteroid Day.
Thank you so much.
And with that, we're going to take a short break, and we'll soon be back.